I stepped through the tall glass doors of the reunion hall and felt I flicked to the frayed edges of my suit jacket. The fabric was once navy, but now wore the look of second-hand debt, its shoulders drooping like weary soldiers. My shoes, scuffed and stained from roads I would never mention, scuffed once more on the polished marble floor as I forced myself forward. My breath caught when I caught the reflection in the paneled walls, a man who had once dreamed in color, now reduced to muted grays. On the mirror of expectation, past and present collided. I remembered the boy who had run cross-country laps under rain-soaked skies, who had stood first in his class and believed in the promise of his own name. Tonight, the name Grant was handwritten in cheap font on a tag pinned askew to my lapel. No last name, no honorific, just Grant. I swallowed against the sting of pity. Around me, chandeliers sparkled like 1,000 mocking eyes, reflecting a tableau of prosperity I no longer recognized. I adjusted my collar, wishing I could erase every memory that would betray me now. The elevator music swelled and died. Laughter rose from a dozen perfectly manicured lips. I inhaled. The reunion had begun. Clarissa was waiting before I even heard her laugh. Her voice cut through the chatter like glass shards. "Nice dress shirt," she said, her tone flat as a boardroom reprimand. "Did you forget to upgrade your name tag too?" Her friends tittered in unison, the sharp edges of their amusement slicing through my gut. Bryce, my brother, now her fiancé, leaned back against the velvet-draped wall with a grin that tasted of triumph. I pressed my jaw closed. The clinking of glasses filled the space between her words and mine. I could feel the heat rise to my face, as though a spotlight had targeted my embarrassment. I pictured my younger self, full of hope and promise, staring back at me with haunted eyes. What would he say if he saw me now? Would he curse the world for sending him here, or curse himself for believing he could outrun fate? I squared my shoulders, straightened the frayed collar, and smiled. I practiced that smile on the drive over. It was my shield, my final defense. I moved past their circle as if passing through mist, each step a silent promise that I would not be swallowed by their derision. I remembered every slight I had endured, every time I had been told I was too ordinary, too small, too invisible. My life had diverged from theirs years ago when I left Alabama to chase shadows in foreign deserts, when I traded boardroom battles for missions nobody would ever know. While they toasted promotions in carved crystal, I had led operations buried under layers of secrecy. They saw a second-hand suit. I saw a uniform beneath, hidden for good reason. They heard a laugh. I heard orders being barked in a distant command center. They lived in glossy profiles. I traded dollars for data, rewrote the rules of engagement. In their world, I was a footnote. In mine, they never appeared. As I crossed the hall, I caught glimpses of familiar faces transformed by time and wealth. The quarterback who'd crashed his career in a blaze of publicity, the valedictorian who vanished into legal drudgery, the socialite whose Instagram feed glowed brighter than any spotlight. They wore their success like armor and carried their trophies like oversized shields. I glanced down at my tag, Grant, and felt the full weight of that single word. It carried everything I had been, everything I had lost, and everything I still carried inside me. I had once believed recognition would come with medals or titles. Now I understood truth was its own reward. I paused by a refreshment table, where platters of canapes gleamed under fluorescent lights. I picked up a piece of dry chicken, its crust as parched as my own hopes, and chewed slowly, tasting humiliation and something else, something fierce and cold, as clear as steel. Clarissa's laughter fluttered behind me like gunfire. "Still chewing on your failures, Grant?" she called, her voice sweet as poison. I turned, smiled again, and lifted my chin. I nodded politely, acknowledging her existence without granting her control over my story. I felt every head swivel toward me. Curiosity, amusement, pity, contempt. I met each gaze quietly, without shame or anger, and let the silence speak for me. When I exhaled, I felt something shift inside, a quiet resolve, a remembrance of why I was here. They thought they knew me. They thought they had the final word. But names on badges mean nothing in the dark. The real name tag was the history I carried in my bones and the missions written in memory. I would not wear their judgment tonight. I would walk through their sneers and store their disbelief like ammunition. I would survive this reunion the same way I had survived everything else, unseen until I chose to be seen. I smoothed the lapel one last time and stepped back into the thrumming center of the ballroom. My heart had settled into a calm rhythm, a drumbeat that told me I was still here, that I was still exhaling. I would endure their snickers, their false congratulations, their pitying glances. I would let them believe they had won this small battle. I stood tall, offered the practice smile again, and let the music wash over me. They did not know what I carried beneath this suit, and they never would. But for this moment, I did not need them to. I took a deep breath and let the smile linger, steady, unbroken, like an echo of the boy I once was. And in that silent victory, I heard the faintest whisper of my own name, spoken not by others but by the man I refused to forget. The ballroom shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, each beam of light refracting off polished surfaces until the room looked gilded in a false kind of gold. I moved through the crowd like a shadow passing beneath lamplight, aware of every gaze that flicked to the back of my suit, to the cheap name tag that read "Only Grant," and then slid away. Tables were arranged in neat rows, each marked with gold ink cards bearing distinguished names and titles. Dr. Helena Wright, Mr. Marcus Steele, Ms. Vivian Clark, but mine had been printed on plain cardstock and pinned to a folding table near the service exit. I surveyed the scene as if viewing it through a narrow slit. Lawyers in tailored suits applauding corporate partners, socialites in satin gowns posing for selfies, alumni exchanging trophies of success like sacred relics. The hum of conversation was punctuated by polite laughter, the tinkle of champagne flutes, and the practiced grace of people who believed they were living their best lives. To them, I was the forgotten one again. I skirted around a cluster of old classmates celebrating promotions I'd never heard of, picking at a piece of chicken so dry it amounted to little more than sawdust between my teeth. Bryce leaned over to Clarissa, his arm brushing the small of her back like a gesture of triumph, and whispered something that made her toss her head back in laughter so brittle it snapped like porcelain. I cut my eyes away before they could see me burning with indignation. It had been weeks since I'd last faced anyone from high school, but the old hierarchy still held sway here, the popular, the successful, and the invisible. I had once believed that the passage of time would erase those categories, that achievement would break old bonds and forge new respect. Now I saw how naive I had been. Those who had laughed at my lack of titles before were still laughing, their derision as sharp as the day we graduated. Bryce caught my glance and raised his eyebrows, a smug curl at the corner of his lips. He called out, loud enough for those nearest to hear, "Grant's probably still fixing fax machines in Alabama, right? Or is that a side gig?" The group tittered at the joke, one of those half-hearted laughs people forced to hide discomfort at cruelty disguised as humor. My jaw tightened, but I chewed and swallowed before I spoke. Words would only feed their spectacle. Instead, I moved toward the balcony doors, every step measured so they'd know I chose to leave their mockery behind. The swing of the doors carried me outside, and the muffled sound of laughter trailed behind like an echo I refused to answer. Fresh air hit me with the softness of a confession. I leaned against the balcony railing, the night sky a deep indigo above the rooftop, punctuated by the distant pulse of city lights. The wake of the reunion drifted up in soft waves, tinkling glasses, clipped conversations, the rustle of fabric as someone brushed past. I slid my hand into my pocket and touched the smooth metal of my encrypted phone. It buzzed with a single notification, a secure message from the intelligence channel where I had once commanded operations few could imagine. Level black. Threat update. Briefing window. 48 hours. My pulse quickened. Here, under the indifferent sky, I was neither a figure of ridicule nor a failed alumnus. I was Lieutenant General Grant Maddox, strategist of clandestine missions that shaped global security. The uniform I had shed for this reunion lay folded beneath my suit coat, hidden because these people could not comprehend its weight. A distant clatter echoed inside as someone dropped a glass. I closed my eyes and inhaled, letting the tension seep from my shoulders. Out here, separated by just a pane of glass from the glittering farce inside, the world felt clearer. I tasted metal and rain and something ancient, like the tang of gunpowder on my tongue. I remembered why I had disappeared from their lives, not because I had failed, but because I needed to operate beyond the reach of public acclaim. While they toasted each other's promotions, I had orchestrated rescue missions, penetrated enemy lines, and secured classified intel that no history book would ever record. I had learned that power lived in silence, that influence did not require applause. A voice behind me made me turn. Dr. Mariah Denton stood in the doorway, her face lit by concern. "Grant, they're asking for you again," she said gently. Her eyes were gray, sharp as steel, and I saw the reflection of the ballroom lights flicker in them. Clarissa and Bryce have been rallying alumni to discredit you. They're spreading rumors that you inflated your rank, that you've been living off old war stories for attention. I exhaled, the night air billowing around me like a cloak. Let them try, I said softly. They'll see the truth, eventually. Mariah nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where skyscrapers pierced the sky. I'll send you the files, photos, mission reports, signatures. You'll have everything you need. I gave her a faint half-smile, an acknowledgement, not an apology. She turned and slipped back inside, leaving me alone with the night. I pressed a finger to my temple and activated the secure line, readying myself to become the strategist they needed. My life had diverged from theirs years ago, and tonight confirmed that divergence. They toasted champagne. I prepared for war. They clutched table cards. I held classified orders. They lived for the spotlight. I thrived in the shadows. My name tag might read Grant, but my identity ran far deeper than a reunion badge. I tucked the phone back into my pocket, straightened the lapel of my suit jacket, and re-entered the ballroom without a word. Their laughter stung less now, tempered by the conviction that this small world of gold ink cards and empty trophies would soon witness the return of a soldier who never truly left the battlefield. I excused myself from the polished echo chamber of the ballroom and slipped out through the side door, letting the heavy drapes fall shut behind me like the curtain on a stage I'd never meant to perform on. The air outside was cool and thin, scented faintly of rain and ozone, a promise of storms to come. I let the door click shut and leaned against the brick wall, tasting something raw and electric on my tongue. My encrypted phone pulsed in my hand with an urgency that felt almost intimate. I thumbed the screen and saw the classified alert, level black. Threat update. Briefing window, 48 hours. For words that carried the weight of every decision I'd ever made, every mission I'd ever planned. Up above, the night sky was ink-stained and full of stars, cold pinpricks of light shining down on a world that thought victory meant applause and golden plaques. They didn't know what silence was. They didn't know how you could wage wars in hidden rooms and never trade a word about it. They reveled in promotions. I'd orchestrated operations buried 5 levels deep beneath NATO command. While they toasted each other's acclaim with crystal flutes, I'd been in basements lit only by map projections and humming servers, coordinating the extraction of hostages nobody knew existed. I pressed my back flat against the wall and closed my eyes, remembering the moment I traded the glare of civilian celebration for the hush of covert briefing rooms, where a misstep could mean thousands of lives lost. A soft click behind me made me pivot. The balcony door swung open, but instead of the laughter I'd left behind, I heard only the muffled percussion of a distant jazz standard, filtered through thick glass. No one followed me out here, too busy clinking glasses and reaffirming their places on the podium of success. I raised my phone and tapped the secure channel, sending a silent acknowledgement back to headquarters. The message vanished in a blink, replaced by coordinates and a succinct update. Data breach confirmed. Project Indigo compromised. Immediate redeployment requested. I inhaled, feeling the pulse in my throat speed up. Project Indigo had been my brainchild, a network of encrypted pathways and phantom servers designed to trap adversaries in a web of false trails. I'd built it to be invisible, untraceable, unassailable. And now someone had found the door I thought was locked for good. I stood under the fluorescent glow of a single balcony light, my suit jacket sticking to my skin as the humidity wrapped around me. The threads of this cheap reunion suit felt alien against the memory of combat-grade fabrics I once wore, Kevlar weave beneath a tailored exterior, sensors woven into the lining, comms cables threaded through the collar. Tonight, they mocked the cloth. They didn't know its history. They didn't know that beneath this borrowed fabric beat the heart of a man who had stared down terror in places they slept peacefully. I slid a hand into my pocket and let my fingers brush against the cold metal of my dog tags, silver discs stamped with my birth name and rank. They had taken everything visible from me, but they could never steal my true identity. I reached the end of the balcony and peered over the railing. Below, valet attendants shone shoes as guests drifted between tables. A waiter wound through the crowd carrying a tray of champagne, the glasses glowing like captured fireflies. I remembered the first time I had stood in a similar tableau. Except then the lights had been red-tinted, the air thick with tension, and the only sound had been the low hum of night vision goggles. We'd been perched on a rooftop in Damascus, waiting for the order to move, every eye scanning the horizon for threats that lurked in shadows. We saved a convoy that night. Nobody back home knew what happened. They celebrated stock options. I celebrated survival. The buzz of my phone dragged me back to the present. New text. Secure facility ready. Brief at 0800 hours. Coordinates attached. I swallowed the lump in my throat and squared my shoulders. Duty had no place among petty reunions. I slipped the device back into its hidden pocket and inhaled deeply, bracing myself for the storm, both meteorological and geopolitical, that was on the horizon. I could almost taste the ozone mixing with anticipation. Behind the glass doors, laughter swelled like a tide, ignorant of the riptide of events gathering strength. They toasted to triumphs I designed, but never took credit for. They congratulated each other on minor successes while I untangled global crises in silence. I pressed a hand to the cool brass handle and let the echoes of their mirth wash over me as I re-entered. In my mind, I drew a line. Their world of gilded vanity ended here. Beyond this night, I was returning to a world where every decision was life or death, not applause or pity. I rejoined the ballroom with a calm so complete it startled even me. Some guests glanced my way, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Never suspicion, never reverence. They saw only the ex-classmate in a rumpled suit. I offered a polite nod and moved past them, heading for the main hall where the event continued. I passed tables adorned with trinkets of accomplishment, signed books, framed photos of accolade smiles, charity awards, and wondered how many of these tokens would survive the scrutiny of truth. I found Clarissa and Bryce again, their laughter still brittle, their eyes bright with self-satisfaction. I locked onto them for a moment, my face placid. I didn't engage. I didn't need to. My mind was already mapping routes to secure locations, calculating timetables for extraction teams, coordinating intel with operators I trusted more than any supposed friend or lover in this hall. They had no idea that in less than 2 days, I would be deep in a secure bunker, surrounded by analysts and strategists, planning the counterstrike that would neutralize the threat they'd only glimpsed in headlines. I allowed myself a brief, private smile as I passed. They thought this was all there was to me. Let them think that. I carried a burden far heavier than their gossip. Their world would fade at midnight. Mine would burn on for weeks, even months, as I hunted ghosts of code breaches and phantom servers. I would not be undone by their whispers. I was Grant Maddox, once forgotten but never truly gone, and as I moved back into the light of their celebration, I carried the quiet war in my chest like a ticking clock, an unseen force that would change everything, without a single toast or a drop of champagne. The hum of celebration inside the ballroom shattered like glass the moment the chandeliers rattled overhead. A distant rumble crept through the vaulted ceiling, growing louder until every polished surface trembled. Wine glasses wobbled in holders, and the soft laughter of alumni cracked into startled gasps. I was standing at the center of the dance floor, having just let slip a polite nod toward a former debate champion, when the first low roar seized the room's breath. Clarissa's eyes went wide, her lipstick cracking into a perfect frown as she gripped Bryce's arm. He too froze, his perfected facade of triumph crumbling into confusion. The rumble coalesced into a roar as spotlights flickered and dimmed. Then, with a roar that shook the windows, a black helicopter sliced through the glass of the ceiling's grand skylight, its rotor wash blasting forth shards of crystal and steel like deadly confetti. Panic exploded. Tables overturned as people scrambled for cover, their screams of frantic percussion beneath the roar of the rotors. I didn't flinch. My training took over in an instant. I pivoted toward the shattered skylight and scanned for Colonel Ayres, whose succinct presence I knew would anchor the chaos. Beneath vaulted arches and flickering lights he strode, crisp in a dress uniform that bore medals I had yet to receive. He raised a hand in a commanding gesture that cut through the cacophony like a guillotine. Lieutenant General Maddox. "Sir, the Pentagon needs you," he called, his voice steady as mortar. The words felt like gravity, pulling me upright, stripping away any pretense of second-hand suits and reunion ridicule. A moment of stunned silence rippled through the crowd as guests pressed against one another, eyes wide, breaths caught in throats. Clarissa stared at me with a disbelief that stung sharper than any insult. Bryce's jaw hung open, his triumphant grin nowhere to be found. The phrase Lieutenant General echoed in my mind like a mantra I had buried beneath paperwork and secrecy. The suit they'd sneered at was irrelevant now. Beneath it lay the uniform I'd once worn in war zones. I straightened my collar, measured my breath, and nodded once to Colonel Ayres. "Duty calls," I said softly, but with enough force that the words echoed through the stunned ballroom. I strode toward the shattered skylight, dodging overturned chairs and dazed alumni. The air smelled of smoke and shattered crystal. I reached the edge of the debris and peered up at the helicopter's open hatch, where the whine of engines met the night sky. My oak leaf insignia caught the flickering emergency lights as I climbed onto the platform. Each step a reclamation of identity buried under years of clandestine missions. Below me, the banquet hall shrank into a blur of terrified guests, their gasps and cries receding as the rotors lifted me into the night. As I settled into the harness and the door shut behind me, I felt the weight of every whispered rumor, every cruel snicker, fall away. What remained was the taut line of purpose that connected me to every operation I had ever led. Above the city lights, the helicopter banked sharply, revealing a panorama of skyscrapers and quiet streets. My mission update glowed brightly on the tablet Colonel Ayres handed me. A cyber breach had compromised Project Indigo's central nodes, and sensitive NATO archives were at risk of exposure. The coordinates ticked on the screen, leading us to a secure landing zone outside Washington. We flew low over the Potomac, the water a dark ribbon guiding us toward the Pentagon's fortress walls. In that moment, I felt time stretch thin between the reunion far below and the urgency of global security high above. I donned a headset, checked my comms, and heard the clipped voices of analysts awaiting my orders. There was no room for small-town reunion politics here, no place for the petty world of high school hierarchies. The helicopter settled onto a helipad bathed in floodlight, and I stepped onto the concrete with the ease of returning home. The din of alarm bells greeted me as doors swung open to a corridor lined with staffers and security officers. Colonel Ayres fell into step beside me, his face unreadable in the harsh light. "They've traced the breach to a deep cover cell in Eastern Europe," he said. I nodded, already parsing possibilities in my mind. The protocols to isolate the leak, the teams to deploy, the misinformation campaign to launch against the adversary's counterintelligence. My heart thrummed with the familiar rhythm of command. I retrieved my tablet and tapped through encrypted files, diagrams, and classified reports. Project Indigo was more than a network. It was a promise of security that could not be allowed to crumble into the hands of those who wished to exploit it. As I entered the Secure Operations Center, screens flickered with live data streams. Analysts froze their work as I passed, meeting my gaze with a blend of relief and anticipation. I took my place at the central console, the hum of servers a steady heartbeat beneath the chatter of keyboards. Colonel Ayres cleared his throat. "Sir, you have the floor." I surveyed the room with the calm authority earned over countless briefings, then looked down at the map projection of Europe spread across the largest screen. My voice rose, clear and unflinching, as I outlined the containment strategy, tactical countermeasures, cyber-forensic sweeps, liaison protocols with allied agencies. Every phrase carried the weight of lives and stakes well beyond any reunion table. Behind me, the reunion's distant echo became a memory, a trivial echo drowned by the urgent pulse of global crisis. In that secure bunker, beneath layers of encryption and steel, I was neither the forgotten man nor the ex-husband of mocking ex-loves. I was Grant Maddox, Lieutenant General, strategist of silent wars. And as I gave my orders, weaving together every skill I had honed far from the gilded spotlight, I knew this was where I truly belonged. The chandeliers might have shattered on the other side of the city, but here, in the hush of command, my mission was just beginning. The ballroom lay in stunned silence when I stepped back through the shattered doorway, the wail of emergency alarms merging with the low hum of rotor blades fading in the distance. Debris sparkled on the marble floor like jagged reminders of the world they sought to maintain, polished, ordered, contained. I paused beneath the cracked fresco ceiling, aware of every pair of eyes locked on me. Bryce stood rooted to the spot, his smug grin evaporated, replaced by disbelief, so raw his eyelids trembled. Clarissa pressed her palm to her chest, her nails biting into expensive silk as though trying to steady a fracture. I straightened my jacket, the cheap fabric clinging damply to my skin, and reached for the name tag pinned crookedly to my lapel. My fingers brushed the cheap plastic, and I peeled it off effortlessly. It floated to the floor and came to rest atop a pool of broken glass. In that moment, the badge, meant to announce my identity, became nothing more than flotsam in a sea of shattered illusions. I stepped forward, my boots echoing against the stone, and let the name tag drop. It fluttered once and lay face up, the word Grant, smudged by a bead of perspiration. I had never needed a printed badge to define me, yet they clung to it like a lifeline. The uniform beneath this suit weighed more heavily on my shoulders than any reunion insult could, and I smoothed the lapel of my coat, a gesture borrowed from more formal occasions. A reporter's flashlight flickered in the back of the room as a news crew pushed past caterers and stunned guests, their microphones thrust forward like swords. I ignored them. The world they reported on, the glass chandeliers, the faux gold decor, the petty dramas of high school reputations, was as irrelevant to me now as yesterday's headlines. I walked between overturned chairs and strewn napkins, each step measured, deliberate, a reaffirmation of purpose. The scent of champagne mingled with dust and antiseptic as security officers ushered terrified alumni toward the exits. I heard Clarissa's gasp, as though she expected me to weep that I had failed to appear at her side. Bryce's voice cracked when he tried to call my name. I kept moving as though through smoke, each breath clarifying the distance between my past humiliation and my present duty. The room shrank behind me, distorted like a funhouse mirror reflecting every insecurity I once harbored. Yet I felt none of that anymore. My eyes tracked the exit sign glowing green above a rear doorway. Beyond lay the waiting hum of unmarked vehicles, the corridor to a secure convoy that would whisk me back to operations where my rank commanded respect rather than ridicule. I reached the exit and paused, turning to look at the crowd one last time. Their faces were pale, etched with confusion and fear. Some wore tight-lipped relief at surviving a stunt gone awry. Others shot furtive glances at one another, as if to ask who had dared to upend their comfortable world. I considered stepping back inside and leveling them all with a speech, recounting the missions they disdained, the operations they never imagined. But I resisted. Their applause had never been mine to earn, and their pity was no longer mine to accept. I let the moment stand as it was, a snapshot of failure merely because they refused to acknowledge the truth behind the seams of my suit. Outside, headlights carved streaks across wet pavement, and the scent of rain hovered in the air. Colonel Ayres stood beside a black SUV, his posture rigid beneath the glow of a street lamp. He offered a curt nod, and I returned it, stepping off the threshold into the chill that clung to the night. The wind tugged at my coat, as though urging me toward the real battlefields where logic and courage mattered more than appearances. I heard the soft click of the helicopter's rotors in the distance, paling like a dream as I approached the vehicle. The back door swung open, revealing the muted luminance of a mobile command center, screens flickering, cables coiled like vines, analysts poised for action. I climbed inside, and the door shut with decisive force. The world of glass and mockery disappeared behind dark-tinted windows. I settled into the seat, my suit still smelling faintly of perfume and fear, and tapped the tablet tucked into my lap. Classified folders swirled on the screen, each marked with Operation Spectre, Project Indigo, NATO-level black alerts. My fingertips danced over encrypted prompts, initiating data transfers and containment protocols. The reporter's frantic chatter and the reunion's brittle glamour were replaced by the urgent pulse of global security. I adjusted the headset that lay coiled beside me, its earpiece cold against my collarbone, and prepared to speak commands that would determine the fate of continents. The SUV rumbled forward, tires hissing against wet pavement as we merged into traffic. City lights refracted in puddles like broken promises. I exhaled and closed my eyes for a moment, remembering nights spent in war rooms lit by map projectors and coffee-stained desks. I recalled the faces of soldiers saved by decisions made under pressure, of allies protected from sabotage by strategies woven in silence. Their gratitude had been quiet, no speeches, no medals bestowed in crowded halls, just a nod in the field and a return home intact. That was the applause I sought, the validation that echoed in the memories of those whose lives I had preserved. The vehicle turned onto the secure drive leading to the Pentagon perimeter, and I opened my eyes, composed and resolute. The fleeting ache left by reunion jeers had melted away, replaced by the clarity of mission. My brother's smug superiority, my ex-wife's dismissive laughter, the world's refusal to see beyond a second-hand suit. All that mattered now was the work ahead. The SUV's lights swept across the towering facade, and I tapped the comms unit, ready to rejoin a fight that never needed an audience or a gold plaque. With every heartbeat, I embraced the truth that defined me. I served in silence so that the world could stand loud with the freedoms I protected. The door to the mobile command center closed around me like a second skin, and I leaned forward, voice steady as steel, to issue the orders that would secure Project Indigo once more. Inside the cocoon of the helicopter's rear cabin, the tablet's glow cut through the darkness as Colonel Ayres handed it to me with a nod that brooked no hesitation. I settled into the reinforced seat, the harness straps crossing my chest like the bars of a cage that both bound and protected me. The rotors thudded overhead, an incessant heartbeat of flight, carrying us away from the ruins of a reunion that had never understood me. I opened the briefing file labeled Project Indigo, Compromise Analysis, and let the words flow over me. Cyber breach confirmed. NATO data leak suspected. Redline priority. The coordinates of the breach zone blinked in cold, clinical typeface. I tapped the encrypted network link, pulling up diagrams of server nodes, phantom IP addresses, and cascading vulnerability charts. Each line and arrow told a story of breach and betrayal, of adversaries probing defenses I had built to be impenetrable. As the helicopter banked over the city's glow, I let my mind travel back to when I had first devised Project Indigo. It had been in a nondescript concrete bunker beneath a NATO outpost, 20 years ago, a younger man furious at the limits of conventional warfare. My team and I had sketched the concept on a whiteboard stained with coffee rings, an adaptive cyber architecture that could anticipate attacks by simulating enemy behaviors, rerouting data through phantom gateways, and deploying decoy packets like false trails in a labyrinth. We had named key elements after mythical specters: Operation Wraith, Protocol Shade, Project Indigo, each a ghost designed to haunt those who dared breach our walls. I remembered the late nights spent calibrating encryption algorithms, the bitter taste of exhaustion, the exhilaration when simulated hacks failed to penetrate our defenses. In those moments, I knew I was forging something that transcended medals and civilian acclaim, a silent shield that would protect thousands without a single public accolade. The present intruded when Colonel Ayres cleared his throat. "Sir, we've traced a pattern. The intruder's signature matches that of a deep cover cell we thought neutralized 10 years ago, Group Black Raven." My pulse quickened. Black Raven had been the syndicate that executed the 2015 Vienna data heist, slipping through 3 layers of EU protocols before disappearing into the shadows. We dismantled them piece by piece, or so I had believed. But the file before me showed fresh code variants, old backdoor exploits reactivated, and nodes re-established in ghost servers across Eastern Europe. They had studied our every move, learning from our countermeasures, evolving. The magnitude of the betrayal stung like a phantom bullet. I tapped through the breach timeline. Initial infiltration 6 weeks ago, lateral movement detected 4 weeks ago, data exfiltration commencing 2 weeks ago. By the time NATO's civilian oversight noticed unusual traffic, Black Raven had siphoned classified intel on troop deployments, satellite reconnaissance feeds, even covert operations still underway. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "Prepare a full-spectrum countermeasure plan. I want every trace of their ghost net isolated. Deploy active defense scripts to disrupt their communication channels. Initiate back counterintelligence probes to uncover their command nodes." The technicians nodded, fingers dancing across illuminated keys. They knew better than to argue. I closed the node mapping window and summoned the dossier on Black Raven's known operatives. Photos of men and women I had once interrogated flickered on the screen, agents who had vanished when I thought we'd broken their network. I traced a finger over one of the newer aliases, a woman codenamed Nightingale, believed to have died in a drone strike. Now, her digital fingerprints reappeared in the breach logs, mocking my assumptions. The helicopter banked again, skimming low over a ring of trees surrounding a clandestine landing zone. I inhaled and exhaled, centering myself on the mission ahead. My suit, wrinkled from the day's chaos, felt inconsequential compared to the gravity of what we faced. Outside the reinforced windows, floodlights pierced the night, casting long shadows onto the concrete tarmac. We touched down with a jolt that echoed through my bones. Colonel Ayres signaled for security teams to form a perimeter as I gathered my tablet and slid into the night vision goggles slung around my neck. I switched them on, and the world adopted shades of green and black, every movement becoming sharper, every silhouette defined. We moved in formation toward the entrance of the secure compound, a nondescript gray building with no signage, its concrete walls scarred by time. I led the way, adrenaline sharpening every sense. The breach analysts followed, laptops and external drives in hand. Inside, the operations center buzzed with activity, screens lining the walls, analysts clustering in huddles, air thick with the clatter of keyboards. I paused at the threshold, inhaled the stale scent of recycled air, and surveyed the scene. This was ground zero of our cyber defense, the nerve center where we would wage a digital war against an enemy most would never know existed. I tapped my comms earpiece. General Maddox to all stations. Status update. Replies crackled through static-laden channels. Containment scripts 27% complete. Forensics team isolating corrupted nodes. Active defense grid engaged. Exfiltration path identified and severed. Good. Faster than I had expected. But this was only the beginning. I moved to the central hollow projection table, where a 3D map of the Phantom network rotated slowly. Each pulsating dot represented a server node. Our own in blue, the Raven proxies in red. The red dots blinked urgently, their positions shifting like restless spirits. I placed a digital marker on the densest cluster. That's our target. Deploy countermeasure packages there first, code collapse, data fragmentation, complete node erasure, and cross-reference any recovered packets for metadata. We'll trace the command stream back to its source. A junior analyst looked up, eyes wide. Sir, if we deploy the collapse script now, it could trigger a rapid data dump, risking civilian collateral in the region. I considered the risk. Cyber warfare rarely stayed contained. Echoes rippled out to banks, hospitals, utilities. Lives hung in the balance. I tapped the table twice. We go tactical, limit scope to military channels only. Initiate selective quarantine. Then we pivot to full-scale eradication when we have the cleanest path. Understood. Nods all around. I felt the weight of command settle on my shoulders, familiar and uncompromising. As our plan coalesced, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the irony. The same Project Indigo that had shielded NATO's secrets from prying eyes was now under siege by ghosts we thought we'd buried. Yet this was neither surprise nor defeat. It was the perpetual nature of war, digital or kinetic. I tapped a series of commands, watched the red nodes flicker and diminish as our defenses struck back. The room hummed with focused urgency. Colonel Ayres elbowed me gently. Your ex-wife and brother are issuing press statements, he murmured, voice low. They claim you abandoned them, that you left just as we needed you. I allowed a small, cold smile. Let them spin their narratives. Real victory would be their silence when the breach was sealed, and the truth of my service stood unforgiving and unassailable. I turned back to the hollow projection, the network map a latticework of light and shadow. Continue the quarantine sweep. Initiate counterprobe to find Nightingale's new safe houses. Redirect any civilian traffic away from our defense grid. Mark this as top priority. Find and neutralize Black Raven's node this cycle. The team fell into motion, the room alive with precision. The past they buried resurfaced in every line of code we expelled, but this time, I wouldn't let it slip away again. Here, in the depths of cyber conflict, I reclaimed the narrative they refused to see. My name would carry weight not because of a reunion badge, but because I refused to remain unseen. This fight, waged in silence and shadows, proved once more that true power lies not in applause but in persistence, and I had both in abundance. I sat at the small glass desk in my apartment, the one I had barely unpacked after coming home from the Pentagon, and stared at the incoming video call notification from Dr. Mariah Denton. The neon glow of my laptop screen cast sharp shadows across my face, reflecting the tension and fatigue I'd tracked from one mission to the next. My uniform hung wrinkle-free on a garment rack behind me, a silent testament to the world I inhabited. I clicked accept, and Mariah's image filled the frame. Her eyes were bright but clouded with urgency. Grant, she said, voice low even though she was talking through a secure line. They're at it again. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands clenching into fists. Mariah continued, Clarissa and Bryce have mobilized alumni resources to dispute your Medal of Honor. They've hired private investigators to dig up any discrepancy in your service record, emails, rationed itineraries, any sign you inflated your rank. My jaw tightened. I had known they'd be petty, but I had believed the evidence of my service, black and white signatures on classified memos, completed operation graphs, witness testimony from Joint Chiefs, would stand on its own. Mariah's fingers danced over her tablet, and she sent me an encrypted file folder labeled truthfile_grantmaddox.zip. Everything you need is in there, she said. Signed orders, mission logs, encrypted dispatches, raw data from the field. Photos of you in brimming sandstorms and frozen mountaintops, meeting heads of state, saluting MREs on forward positions. Even a few declassified drone stills of Operation Spectre. They can't touch you once you release this. I opened the folder. Dozens of PDFs unfurled across the screen. General Orders _ Project Indigo.pdf, Operation Spectre _ Success Report.pdf, Incoming Session _ Transcript.docs, and several image files, grainy but unmistakable, of me standing beside coalition forces in Basra, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan. I scrolled through the files, heart pounding with a mix of vindication and regret. Vindication because I finally held unassailable proof. Regret because these were memories I'd consigned to vaults of secrecy for the good of missions that could never be public. I remembered the first mission that had tested my leadership, a hostage evacuation in Mogadishu under the codename Operation Black Swan. I'd orchestrated the extraction, slipped through militia checkpoints, and guided civilian diplomats to safety under a hail of rifle fire. We'd lost 2 operatives that night, and I had carried each name in my pocket ever since, silent martyrs whose valor lived in secrecy. None of that would matter in a court of public opinion. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of their sacrifice press on me, even as I prepared to wield this truth as a weapon against the lies. Mariah waited patiently. "They'll expect spin," she said. "You need to be precise. No rhetoric. Just evidence." I nodded, though she could not see it. I gathered my resolve and replied, "I'll compile this into a dossier and release it to the press, to the Pentagon, to every news outlet they're courting. I want independent verification from NATO archives by morning." She smiled, even in the dim light. I could see pride glint in her eyes. "I'll back you up with every channel I have." We ended the call. I leaned back in my chair and studied the file names one more time. The irony was palpable. These documents, born of war rooms and encrypted servers, were now destined for public consumption on social media and cable news. I tapped my comms earpiece, calling my aide, Captain Reynolds. Within minutes, he appeared in a secure video window. "General," he greeted, his crisp tone steady despite the late hour. "I've secured rapid release protocols through both civilian outlets and official military channels. Your draft statement is ready for review." I opened the draft, 800 words of bulletproof chronology, enlistment records, educational achievements, promotions, deployments, decorations. I inserted scanned images of my dog tags, matching serial numbers to classified orders. I embedded drone footage stills, declassified under emergency directives, showing the sandblasted face of a man who never sought glory. Each paragraph dismantled the rumor mill that Clarissa and Bryce had set in motion. When I finished, I leaned back and let out a long breath. My pulse settled into a deliberate rhythm as I added a closing line. I served in silence. My record speaks for itself. The next morning, I hosted a live briefing at a small press center near the Pentagon. Reporters jostled for space, cameras lined up like hungry stampedes. I stepped to the podium in full dress uniform, the fabric crisp, the medals on my chest gleaming with the weight of truth. Clarissa and Bryce's statements were already circulating. Accusations of deception, murmurs of a man living off past glories. I let it build to a crescendo, held their whispers in my palm, then began to speak. My voice was measured, void of anger. I recounted my start as a fresh second lieutenant, my promotions earned in the crucible of conflict, the covert operations that saved thousands. I walked them through the chain of command, the signed orders, the classified memos, the photographs of missions that had made no headlines. Each slide I displayed reduced their lies to shadows against the flood of evidence. Microphones clicked, cameras whirred, and I felt time slow. I saw Clarissa's face on a live monitor, her lips pressed thin, her eyes wide with disbelief. Bryce's expression morphed from smug certainty to hollow regret as the reality of unwavering truth washed over him. Reporters scribbled, echoed my words, and by the end of my 30-minute briefing, I had dismantled every false narrative. I closed with the same line I had penned the night before. I served in silence. My record speaks for itself. Then I stepped away, leaving a silence so profound it felt like reverberations through steel. The aftermath unfolded swiftly. Independent fact-checkers corroborated every detail. NATO archives released declassified memos under emergency protocols. Social media erupted with tributes from those who recognized me only now, in full view. Clarissa's hired investigators found nothing. Only the files I released, each stamped with official seals. Bryce issued a public apology that read hollow even on newsprint. They could not erase the truth I had set loose. That evening, back at my apartment, I stood by the window watching dusk settle over Washington. The city lights blinked on, each one a silent promise of vigilance. I peeled off my medals and set them on the desk beside my still-open laptop. The reunion's taunts, the stolen narratives, they were dust before the storm of evidence I had summoned. My life would never again be defined by cheap name tags or borrowed suits. The truth I carried had shattered their illusions, and in that clarity, I found a quiet triumph more enduring than any applause. The silence at last had spoken, and it carried my name in full. The old gym smelled of polished wood and nostalgia as I stepped through the double doors, every eye drawn to the crisp lines of my dress uniform. Metal ribbons caught the overhead lights, glinting brighter than the silent auction items arranged on tables draped in white linen. Volunteers paused mid-conversation, bids halted, all attention shifting to the man who had once been the punchline of every reunion joke. My boots clicked against the hardwood floor as I crossed the center court, Mariah at my side, clutching a binder of service records that felt heavier than any equipment I had carried into combat. The chatter died in the hush that settled over the bleachers and fold-out chairs. I paused beneath the faded championship banners, their frayed edges testament to battles fought decades earlier. Here, where my younger self had cheered classmates from the sidelines, I stood as proof that the invisible could re-emerge in full view. Bryce and Clarissa sat together at the head table, stiff-backed and pale. I met their eyes for a moment, his filled with brittle shock, hers brimming with disbelief, and then turned to face the assembled alumni, parents, and local dignitaries. I laid my hand on the microphone stand, feeling its cool metal steady the tremor in my palm. No one interrupted as I opened the binder and withdrew a photograph. Me, uniform spotless, saluting before the Joint Chiefs of Staff at a White House ceremony. It bore the seal of the Pentagon and the gloss of authenticity. I let the image hover at chest height, letting its weight sink in. Beneath it lay scanned orders for my appointment as lead strategist on Project Indigo, orders that bore the signatures of generals these people would never know. I spoke, voice steady. I did not come here seeking approval or applause. I came to correct the record. The room stayed silent as I laid out the binder's contents on a folding table. Deployment orders, after-action reports, commendations for operations that saved thousands. I recounted, without pride or rancor, the nights spent in war rooms lit by flickering monitors and the hours welded to satellite feeds. I described how Project Indigo had shielded Allied forces from electronic ambushes, how Operation Spectre had evacuated civilians under hostile fire. Each fact landed like a hammer blow against the hardened misconceptions that had built up over years of absence. I watched as captions of surprise spread across faces. Parents who had once nodded politely at my go-nowhere jobs now leaned forward, reading the fine print of documents they had never imagined existed. Former classmates who had laughed at my faded suit now pressed together in clusters, sharing whispered astonishment. The fundraiser's MC stood to the side, mouth agape, as I closed the binder and squared my shoulders. No one clapped, no one jeered. Instead, a reverent quiet filled the gym, as if the ghosts of every unheard story had finally found a voice. I lifted my head and let my gaze scour the crowd one last time. I served in silence because I believed my duty transcended personal acclaim, I said softly. Tonight, I share the truth so it can no longer be ignored. I spoke not to shame, but to illuminate. Then I stepped back, the hush transforming into a respectful pause, one that carried more weight than any manufactured applause. As I exited the court, Mariah fell into step beside me. "You did it," she whispered. I nodded, feeling a release I had not known possible. Outside, night had settled over the campus, lights from the gym spilling across the courtyard. The alumni wall loomed beyond, its engraved names now joined by a plaque honoring alumni who had served. My name would join theirs, at last, unburdened by rumor and illusion. I inhaled deeply, tasting the cool air. The world I had reclaimed was not defined by applause or reunion snickers, but by the quiet acknowledgement that truth, when wielded with conviction, can outshine every false narrative. And as I walked away from the old gym, The weight of that binder felt lighter than the expectations I had shed and infinitely more powerful than the silence I had once worn like armor. The call came just after sunrise. I had barely finished my first cup of black coffee when the Pentagon's official seal blinked across my secure line. "The president has signed off," the voice said, smooth and direct. "Your Medal of Honor has been approved. Not for this year, for Operation Spectre. 12 years ago." I closed my eyes. For a long moment, I said nothing. 12 years ago, I had led a mission that never made the papers, extraction of a high-value asset, deep within hostile territory. For 1,000 lives saved. Zero recognition. Until now. They told me there would be a formal ceremony at the White House. Dress uniform, cameras, speeches. I didn't ask who else would be there. It didn't matter. I learned long ago not to depend on applause to validate sacrifice. But when I stood on that marble stage, the band's brass notes lifting into the July air, I felt something shift, not pride, not vindication, just visibility. And that was enough. The room had filled with top brass, advisors, veterans, even a few politicians I barely recognized. I stood at attention, not blinking as the president stepped forward, reciting the words that would bind my name to the nation's highest military honor. The medal rested heavy on my chest, heavier than I expected. Not in weight, but in memory. Every name I'd ever carried silently echoed through my mind. Every loss, every mission, every silent return home. Somewhere out there, Clarissa was watching. I knew because the news had already gone viral, her name trending in all the wrong ways. Bryce had gone quiet on every channel. Their silence said more than any statement could. No retractions. No apologies. Just an uncomfortable absence, like people trying to outrun a truth they thought they could bury. But I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. After the ceremony, I stood outside on the south lawn. The crowd had thinned. Cameras packed away. Dignitaries shuffled off. I remained, hands behind my back, the medal now reflecting the low sun. For the first time in years, I felt still. Not haunted. Not hidden. Just present. A young intern approached me, maybe 22 at most, nervously clutching a notepad. "Sir," she said, "your story, people should hear more of it. You were invisible for so long." I gave her a small smile. "Sometimes that's the job." She hesitated. "But doesn't it hurt?" I looked out over the lawn, where the flag moved gently in the breeze. It did. Until now. And I meant it. Not because of the medal, but because the silence was over. Because the name Grant Maddox had finally found its place. Not on a folded piece of cardstock, but etched quietly into the fabric of history. Seen. Known. Enough. The cadets at Fort Willard always sat up a little straighter when I entered the lecture hall, not out of fear, but something quieter, more earned. Respect, perhaps. They knew my name now. They'd seen the ceremony, read the transcripts, watched the grainy footage of missions I'd never intended to make public. Yet in this room, my voice didn't carry the tone of a war hero. It carried something heavier. A man who'd lost years to silence, and still chose discipline over recognition. I paced slowly across the front of the room, the rows of crisp uniforms in perfect posture. "We don't talk about medals here," I said. "We talk about character. Character isn't what people say about you. It's what you still do when no one's watching, and when the people watching believe the wrong story." A young cadet in the front row, Cadet Emerson, sharp-eyed and careful with her questions, raised her hand. "Sir, what if no one believes in you? What if the people closest to you say you'll never matter?" I paused, letting the weight of her words settle. How many nights had I asked myself that very question? Standing alone in desert outposts, reading one-line emails from Clarissa that felt colder than field rations. Watching my brother walk off with her like I'd handed her over. Standing at that reunion, surrounded by smirks and glass smiles, wearing a suit they all believed was my only armor. "Then believe in the truth," I said. "And keep your records. Because one day, the silence ends. And when it does, you need to be ready. Not angry, not petty. Ready. Ready to stand without shaking when the world finally listens." Emerson nodded, scribbling that line into her notebook. I didn't add that sometimes the silence ends too late for the apology to matter. Or that, by the time it does, you've already made peace with the version of yourself that no one clapped for. After class, I stayed behind, running through files on upcoming security seminars, curriculum changes, and defense briefings. These days, my uniform didn't see combat, but it carried just as much weight in these classrooms as it did in foreign conflict zones. I was shaping minds now, not just soldiers. The invisible work that kept tomorrow's chaos from forming. Later that week, I walked past the alumni wall on the East Campus. It had been updated since the ceremony. I knew what I was looking for before I saw it. Bronze. Clean. Subtle. No spotlight. Just Lieutenant General Grant Maddox, service beyond the line. I ran a gloved hand across the lettering. It didn't shimmer like a medal, didn't demand notice. And maybe that's what I liked most about it. A few feet away, a new section had been added, Service in Silence. A column of names that hadn't been there before. I recognized none of them personally, but I knew them just the same. Intelligence officers, code breakers, field medics, translators. People who had served without recognition for decades. My name led the list. Not at the top, just first. A symbol, not a spotlight. Weeks later, I received a card. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name, scrawled neatly on the envelope. I knew the handwriting instantly. Clarissa. I stood in my office for a long time before opening it. Inside, her words were short. I didn't know how far you'd go in silence. I thought silence meant failure. I was wrong. I read it twice. Folded it carefully. Placed it in the back of my desk, behind mission briefings and defense reports. I didn't need to reply. Some silences are their own answers. Still, as I sat by the window that evening, sipping coffee and watching cadets train in the distance, I thought about everything that had been taken and everything I'd reclaimed. My name, my service, my dignity. And I realized something. Silence had never been the absence of sound. It was the forging of something stronger beneath the noise. Now, every day I stood before a new generation. I taught them not how to fight, but how to hold steady when no one sees. How to move with integrity when your name tag reads forgotten. And how to survive the weight of silence without letting it crush the truth inside you. In the end, the quiet moments meant the most. No applause, no stage, just bronze, just truth, just peace.